Well, our colleague here, Rachelle Akuffo, spoke with George Karekwaivanane about Zimbabwe's economy. He is a lecturer in African Studies at the University of Edinburgh. She started off by asking him about how the new government is affecting the country's economic outlook.
I think the economy has been struggling. The unemployment has been, by some estimates, more than 90%. People have been struggling to get cash. There's been a serious liquidity crunch. You find people queuing on the banks to get their own cash. People have had to rely on the informal sector for their livelihoods, but because of the low disposable income for many people, that has still been a very difficult way to make ends meet. So at the time before Mugabe was overthrown by this military intervention, things were really difficult. After that, we had a sort of a sense of optimism, a big amount of sort of optimism and euphoria around the economy. You even saw this registered in the stock market. You saw prices, the stock market rallied. But I think now the sentiment has settled as people start to watch and see and think, where is this really going? Can the new government really achieve what it has promised? So now things have not really changed. In fact, when you look at the prices in the shops, things are actually increasing. Anything that is import content in it is actually rising because of the parallel market rates of the US dollar to the Zimbabwean bond note. So in a sense, things have not really changed, but there has been some rise in positive sentiment, which is now seemed to have dampened down.
So the newly appointed President Mnangagwa spoke highly of his predecessor, even using terms like father to describe Mugabe. But he also said it was the day that Zimbabwe renews itself. So how do you describe his path forward for the economy in terms of where it differs and where it overlaps from his predecessor?
Part of the language was about giving Mugabe a dignified exit. But I think one of the things that Mnangagwa is respected for is, firstly, he's a pragmatist. So Mugabe could get stuck in the ideological battles between the West and Zimbabwe. But Mnangagwa is reputed to be a pragmatist. So he's also in business. So he knows what investors need and what investors would be attracted by. So I think that economic pragmatism is one of the key things that will differentiate Mnangagwa from Mugabe. At the same time, Mnangagwa is reputed to have a very strong work ethic. So he's in first thing in the morning and is out late at night, and apparently he reads everything that is said before him. So there's a sense that we now have an administrator who can do much more work than a 93-year-old man can do. So in that sense, I think there are those positives, and there is that stark difference in the way that Mnangagwa can perform. Having said that, I would really counsel caution about being too optimistic about what can be done with the Zimbabwean economy at this stage. So I think Mnangagwa does have strengths, but there's a huge amount of work ahead.
So then, looking ahead to the 2018 election, what do you think are going to be the top economic priorities, especially that voters are going to be looking at?
In a sense, it's the low-hanging fruit. They need to solve the liquidity crunch. People need to be able to go to the bank and get their hard-earned money. So I think if they can solve that, that's going to be one of the key things that people can point to and say President Mnangagwa has achieved. Secondly, it's going to be about employment. Young people, the amount of youth unemployment in Zimbabwe is extremely high. Young people need to have a sense that there is hope for the future, and this new government is going to bring about that hope. In terms of the inflation, the basket of goods for food is really rising. The price is really rising in a serious way. Families need to be able to make ends meet. So there needs to be another visible changes with respect to the price of food, the day-to-day commodities that people need. So if you can be able to achieve those basic things that people need, then that's going to be a big boost for him as he goes into the next elections.
Now, we know that the IMF said it was concerned about the fiscal deficit among some of the other challenges that it saw in Zimbabwe's economy, but they were encouraged by some of the reforms that were laid out in the December budget. Now, Zimbabwe's finance minister predicts about 4.5% growth for 2018. What's your take on that?
I saw that and I thought that was hugely optimistic. That was hugely optimistic. And the revenues that they're expecting are also predicated on that kind of optimistic, growth. At the same time, the expenditures are based on that growth as well. So the budget deficit is supposed to be based on very optimistic figures that the revenue is supposed to increase by almost 700 million. If that does not happen, because they're hoping to more than halve the budget deficit, but if that growth is not achieved, it means we're stuck with the same level of budget deficit that we have. And if you read the budget statement, the longer one, the government actually admits that budget deficits have forced it to borrow on the domestic market, which has actually fueled a lot of the shortage in the liquidity crunch that we have. So if that optimistic rate is not achieved, in fact, we might be still stuck in the same place that we are. So I would have preferred it if he was more conservative in his estimates, because that only creates a crisis of expectation.